Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's tremendous to be here in this center of entertainment here in Essen. I hope to provide some of the entertainment. But actually, I will say, before I start, I actually really do appreciate the trust that is placed in me as somebody who is known to be skeptical about some of what's going on in the hydrogen space. So to give me this stage at this event where here we are, this is the center of innovation in hydrogen in the world today. So I call it Whydrogen because I think it sort of sums up the questioning about where are we in this, at this point in history. There's clearly a huge amount of interest in hydrogen. It's clearly having a moment, but it's really important that we step back and ask ourselves why. Why are we so excited? But also, why are things not going, frankly, according to plan? And, the plan is an old plan. The plan is not a new plan. Pardon me. This is Jules Verne, who was pretty much the first person to think that an economy could run on hydrogen. And he said that it's going to furnish an inexhaustible source of heat and light. And that was 1875. And then the words hydrogen economy were first coined apparently by this chap, John Bockris, who is a professor of electrochemistry, and he was speaking at General Motors' event, and that was back in 1970. Pardon me, after yesterday's wonderful dinner and celebrations, you can see it's affecting my voice a little. So John Bockris came up with this term, hydrogen economy, and it's been in use ever since. Many of us will have read Jeremy Rifkin's book back in 2003 and so on. And we've reached the point now where 56 countries have hydrogen strategies. And they are not just a strategy for doing a bit of hydrogen, they are for hydrogen pervasive throughout the economy. And I know that there's participants here, delegates from Japan, and the Hydrogen Society. This is a vision of a society run on hydrogen. Hydrogen for Japan, we're talking about synthetic methane for heating, fuel cells for and hydrogen for transportation, and ammonia for electricity generation. If hydrogen doesn't work, Japan has no route right now towards net zero 2050. Germany, very explicitly, Chancellor Scholz, industry, heating and fuels. Not just a bit of hydrogen, but industry, heating and fuels. He calls it the gas of the future. I'm not sure I would use the words huge boom about hydrogen. And then here you have Jennifer Granholm. Hydrogen is the Swiss Army knife. And I think some of you will have seen me, and it's a line I've used many times. And I think I was the first person really to hammer home the fact that the Swiss Army knife analogy is fantastic. But we all have Swiss Army knives, but we don't use them for all the things they could do. We use a Swiss Army knife only where it is cheaper, safer, more convenient. Cheaper, safer, more convenient, or when it's the only thing that we have. And hydrogen, I think, is going to go that route, and that is why I'm sort of up here to challenge some of what is the received wisdom in the hydrogen environment. Everybody has a hydrogen strategy. We started with a novelist, we end up with, anyway. Now, here in Europe, of course, hydrogen is being also proposed as this is Ursula von der Leyen calls it the starting point. And there you see Yorgos Chatzimarkakis will be speaking later today, and Marco Alvara will come back to during my remarks. And these are two of the great proponents of the hydrogen kind of, the people who are pushing for hydrogen. And I spoke at the Financial Times Hydrogen Summit last week. And I explained why I have certain reservations. There are things I like, as we'll hear, and things that I don't like. And straight after me, the first question, somebody stood up in the audience and said, "You don't understand. Europe has an energy-intensive economy. We need energy. We're losing the Russian gas. We need energy. And we have a productivity problem and a jobs problem. And hydrogen is the answer." And my response was, well, hang on a second. So, yes, we're losing cheap Russian gas. How do we solve a productivity problem, a competitiveness problem, by switching to the highest cost source of energy? How do you do that? How do you believe that? Because here we are 150 years in, by the way, 100 million tons. It's always worth remembering there is already 100 million tons of hydrogen being used in the global economy. About 8 million tons in Europe, 100 million tons. So if you remember one thing, there's already a market for 100 million tons of hydrogen. We don't need to stimulate a new market if we can't meet the existing market. And we can't. That's electrolysis, right? 0.1%, and it's not even clean electrolysis, that's just electrolysis. That's what 150 years of the hydrogen economy has delivered. Lots of hydrogen, none of it green. Now, fuel cell cars, it's been nearly 50 years that they've been talked about. It's been endless careers spent, efforts to get fuel cell vehicles working. And this is the result here. We're in a climate crisis. There is unbelievable effort going into all sorts of technology. Fuel cell cars are going backwards. They don't even need a forward gear. They just go backwards. And you'll see that China is not even on the list of countries that are trying fuel cell cars. They have some fuel cell trucks. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of projects, thousands of projects. The IEA tracks them. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the company that I started, the team that I created, they track the projects, probably others as well. Lots of projects, but they don't go anywhere. 14% by number of green hydrogen projects have reached the point where money is actually being invested in things being built. But by volume of hydrogen, 1%. 150 years, all of this effort, attention, political capital, money, 1% have reached the point where they're going ahead by volume. The difference between 14% and 1%, by the way, is that it's a lot easier to pull the trigger on a nice hydrogen train or a hydrogen bus or whatever, right? But those are small projects. And what we've also seen is that for 50 years, those projects have happened, and afterwards, there's no follow-up. Electrolyzer industry has capacity for 54 gigawatts of electrolyzers. What it's selling is 4. And it's bleeding red, and it's been bleeding red for decades. Ballard, the most famous fuel cell company, 44 years, I understand, of losses. Now, I was at McKinsey. When the history of hydrogen is written, there'll be a whole chapter on McKinsey's role. And it will not be a chapter that is a pleasant reading for the McKinseyites. McKinsey has been intimately bound up with the most recent wave of over-exuberance and over-excitement and overestimation of what hydrogen can deliver and underestimation of costs. McKinsey now says that the hydrogen costs in 2050 will be higher than what they were saying it would be in 2030 just a couple of years ago. But I learned how to do arrows across the top of slides. So you've got value chain. Everybody focuses on hydrogen production, how to get cheap hydrogen. No, it's not good enough. Getting cheap hydrogen in the wrong place is no use. Anybody here working on white hydrogen, good luck. Production, transportation, storage, distribution, use. If you can't do all of those, you've got nothing as an industry, not individually. So let's look at the problem. We'll go into a few of these. Production, expensive. So all of those 56 hydrogen strategies had one thing in common. Green hydrogen was going to be cheap. Here's the costs in dollars per kilo. And they were all going to get down to within $1, €1, a couple of dollars at most, and quickly, by 2030, pretty close, and by 2050, all the way there. But let's look at real data. All of these strategies were done in the complete absence of data by people, frankly, who don't realize that if you're going to do things like green hydrogen, you need compressors, and you need pipes, and you need tanks, and you need electrolyzers that work if you want to follow intermittent energy, that's hard. That's not easy, that's hard. So those are the results. TNO in Holland, and then a few others. The UK auction results, which actually produced a very good guide to what the price is of this stuff. Total, BCG has summarized a bunch. ArcelorMittal, who took money to do green steel, DRI, and then said they'd do the DRI, but not the green hydrogen. And the reason it has a line is you win the project and then you have to have a sort of 10-year offtake or something like that. So that's reality. That's reality. The European auction, by the way, which was won at a price of 48 euro cents, just to be absolutely clear, this is Rogaciano Rebello, who won the biggest chunk of those European auction results. And what he says is, the European subsidies we won last week were never meant to cover the cost gap with grey hydrogen. The buyer has to pay a premium. So he has 5 years to build the projects, and he needs buyers with a premium. Or he walks away from the option that he has purchased. Don't be fooled by 48 cents premium. The real numbers are the numbers that we saw on the last chart. Now, of course, learning curves, experience curves, my whole career I've been calculating them. From 1985 or 6, I calculated the first experience curves for things like fiber and printed circuit board. And I did fun stuff like rock quarrying, because even there's a learning curve. I do learning curves, I get it. When I saw solar, and when I saw wind, and when I saw batteries, I started new energy finance. That's how much I believe in the learning curve. The problem that you've got with hydrogen production is this. 40% of it, those costs we've just seen, is electricity. As you get cheaper on the other stuff, by the way, that number goes up. Now, if you're out by an order of magnitude on costs, do you think we're going to see electricity become cheaper, green electricity become cheaper by an order of magnitude anytime soon? 10x cheaper? Because I don't. Will solar become a bit cheaper? Yes. Wind? Yes. Might we see some other things? Yes. 10 times cheaper. And then you can expand out the capital cost and say, well, what's in there? What are you actually buying when you do a hydrogen project? And the problem is, the electrolyzer stack is only 11% of the cost of the hydrogen. It's only 11%. You can give me free electrolyzers today, and I can't make cheap hydrogen. That's the reality. Now, we're going to have lots of surplus electricity. Here you've got a chart by a company called Modo, and they look at how many hours of zero or negative cost electricity there are going to be in the UK. UK, of course, with lots of offshore wind, leading in terms of integration of variable renewables into the grid. Don't ask me how that happened, but the UK leads in terms of decarbonization in the G20. I genuinely don't know how we did it, but we did. We have a lot of offshore wind. That's one of the pieces. And what you'll see is right now we're at about 250 hours per year of curtailed electricity. And it could go to 1,000 hours. We're building so much offshore wind. Fantastic, right? Now that 38, 40% electricity, that's going to be free. It's fabulous, yeah? Because you can use that to make renewables. How many times have we heard we're going to make hydrogen with curtailed surplus electricity? I hear it all the time. The problem is 1,000 hours is 11% of the year. And what that means is that 88.6% of the year, you have to pay for your electricity like everybody else. And by the way, if you're in Northern Europe, you're paying Northern European electricity prices, setting aside Scandinavia. Offshore wind at 60, 70 euros per megawatt hour is not going to be cheap. Those of you from Spain, Portugal, Southeast Europe, Italy, you have a chance, and Scandinavia maybe, but only if you don't connect properly to Europe. And the amount you need is gargantuan. If you think you're going to do this with only green hydrogen, if you're a green hydrogen fundamentalist, you absolutely rule out blue hydrogen from natural gas. These are the amounts you need. For the steel industry, 1.3 times all the wind and solar that is installed to date. For aviation, nearly 2 times. For shipping, 1.5 times. All the wind and solar. Right now, we're going to triple, this is what was decided in COP28, we're going to triple wind and solar by 2030. Well, great. That means that between now and 2030, you can use every wind farm, every solar farm, and everything we build to do 2 of these 3. Right? That's reality. And by the way, while we're doing it, we're not decarbonizing the grid, we're not decarbonizing domestic heat, we're not decarbonizing transportation, we're not decarbonizing industry. All we're doing is 2 of these 3. And that's why I say I have made my peace with blue hydrogen, because I think that that would be a bad outcome. If we want to move faster, we're going to have to do other things. We cannot have purity tests. Now we have to do it right. We can have society holding people to account to do things right, but we cannot have technological purity tests. Now I pulled all this, in terms of the gargantuan amount, we'll get to that other chart, you all know the ladder, I know you're waiting for it. In terms of the gargantuan amount that's needed, just to hammer home how much is needed, this is NEOM. NEOM, the biggest green hydrogen project in the world. Very exciting. I'm excited, genuinely. But look what it produces. 220,000 tons of hydrogen per year. 0.2% of that 100 million tons. If you just do the existing things, which will be the top row of the ladder, existing uses, 100 million tons, remember 100 million tons? NEOM is 0.2% of it. It cost $8.5 billion. Next time it'll be cheaper. But still, it's 0.2%. You have to do 500 NEOMs, 500 of them, just to replace existing use of hydrogen. You think you're going to do steel and shipping and aviation and transport and trains and all the rest of it? Really? Now, we've also got to get it from where it's made to where you need it. And marvelous. There's going to be all these pipelines, the European hydrogen backbone. I don't know the price list of all of this. I think it's around the sort of 100 billion mark. You know, it's a bagatelle when you're spending somebody else's money. But here's the interesting thing. That's 2024, and you know what? That's 1987. Same plan. Not 1 kilometer got built. And of course, liquid hydrogen. I have said that only homeopathic amounts of liquid hydrogen will be anywhere in the transportation and energy system. The reason being physics. I said it a few years ago. I was attacked. I was told that I hate hydrogen, all sorts of things. And of course, we're seeing now a general understanding, no liquid hydrogen will be, there's no liquid hydrogen import system like LNG because of physics, the density of hydrogen, the temperature of hydrogen, the astonishing wastefulness of liquefying hydrogen, the boil off 1% a day, the fact that by the time you've sailed it anywhere, a quarter of your hydrogen is gone. Forget liquid hydrogen imports. Now, this is a very good piece of work here by the Austrian Institute of Technology. They looked at how do you get hydrogen by imports into the DACH region, into Austria. And there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing it via liquid hydrogen, pipeline, ammonia. And what they showed was the only way, if you want to have hydrogen at under 4-5 euros per kilo, remember that figure, 4 or 5 euros per kilo, the only way to do it is via a pipeline. And by the way, this was before the big wave of inflation that has hit us and realization about some of the extra costs. So this is optimistic, by the way. Even the optimistic scenario is optimistic, very optimistic. So pipelines do work. And then, of course, ammonia. So Chancellor Scholz went over to Canada and he did a hydrogen deal. And by 2025, next year, Germany's going to be importing hydrogen from Canada. And I said, really? On the ships that don't exist and never will? And I was told, no, it's going to be as ammonia. It's going to be as ammonia. Everybody knows it's going to be. Right, why isn't it an ammonia deal? Why doesn't he call it an ammonia deal? It's a fertilizer deal. It's expensive, clean fertilizer. That's what it is, right? But no, if you want to go and burn it in your power stations, you've got this problem. 20% end-to-end, right? Now, if capital is free, and if no maintenance is needed, and if there are no losses along the way, additional to the process losses, 1 unit in 5 arrives. Which means, by definition, German electricity must cost 5 times Canadian electricity. But capital is not free, and you do need maintenance, and there are losses. So pull a number out of the air. 7 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive. Remember that hydrogen is the key to Europe's productivity and prosperity and growth. With electricity 10 times what it costs in Canada, 7 times, whatever number you want, how does that work? The answer is it doesn't. Well, so then let's do methane, e-methane. E-methane, we're going to use direct air capture, and we're going to use hydrogen, and we're going to do methane, and we're going to import it to Europe because the infrastructure exists. It's easy to use methane, right? Well, guess what? 17.5% end-to-end efficiency back to electricity. How can this possibly? Why are we even talking about this? Well, we're talking about it because of this. These are the subsidies in the US. I call this the subsidy Sankey, right? A lot of us know what a Sankey diagram is. You track the energy through a system. This is the money, the subsidy Sankey. And what you can see is the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, many people think we should cut and paste and copy in Europe, provides $60 per million BTU of subsidies for anybody making e-methane in the US, and then, of course, you can import it into Europe. The market price of methane in the US is $2. $60 subsidy, $2 commodity. Right now, the gas price in Europe is $10, translating it into the same currency, and you add a carbon price, you get to 14. So you can buy gas in Europe and a carbon credit for $14, or you can get $75 of subsidies. Do we think this is a sustainable business model? Right? Could 1 or 2 projects happen? Maybe. Cylindra happened, right? But only 1 Cylindra happened, and only one of these, I think, would ever happen, because American taxpayers are not stupid. Some American taxpayers are not stupid. Now, this guy, Marco Alvera, very eminent career, formerly CEO of Snam, disagrees. But he came on my podcast. Well, he doesn't disagree, actually. Interestingly enough, he agrees. He came on my podcast, and this is what he said. There's a lot of money to be made in layering all the different subsidies. Subsidy for capturing CO2, subsidy for producing renewables, subsidy for producing the hydrogen. And guess what? You can export that molecule to Europe, where it gives you an exemption from the carbon tax. Tell me this is a climate solution. And this bothers me, this idea of layering subsidies. Mr. Alvera is a carrot farmer. That's his business model. The methane is incidental, although it did allow him to get the permits to build an LNG terminal in Wilhelmshaven. That's the level of confusion about this stuff. And the carrots, yes, there were subsidies for renewables. And there's subsidies for lots of things. There's externalities on fossil fuels. I get it. But there's 24 different pots of money, and you still can't get these hydrogen projects done. Think about it. Now, storage, I'll just speed up a little bit in the interest of time. Small scale, there are people out there trying to do it using liquid organic hydrogen carriers and hydrides and so on. 50 years they've been trying, not one commercial product. The large scale, it's unproven, but there's a list of approaches that we could follow. And this is one that is high up on the hydrogen ladder. Why? Because when you have a Dunkelflaute, it is genuinely difficult to deal with if we don't have molecules, and we want clean molecules. So there's a whole load of different approaches, but it has to work as a system. If you're working only on the storage piece, you need to think about the rest of the system. And there's a few things that could work, that look promising. Hydrogen, methanol, methane, and ammonia. And I could see combinations, it won't be all one, I can see combinations of these keeping the lights on during a Dunkelflaute. Distribution, I mean, all these people saying we're going to do whatever with hydrogen out in the community, transport, etc., etc. One diesel tanker, 18 hydrogen tankers. You're the mayor of a small town. 18 times the deliveries to your petrol station, 18 times the road danger, 18 times the cost. Only it's more than that because the trucks on the right are more complex than the one on the left. And then there's blending. It's like the stupid idea from Stupidville that won't die. You spend all that money making hydrogen. I use the UK example, £9.27, but I could use the European figures. And what you do is you mix it with methane, fossil gas, and immediately it's not worth what it was as hydrogen, as a feedstock or something that you can do, all the things you can do with hydrogen. It's worth its heat value. And its heat value is £1 per kilo. So it's an instant destruction of nearly 90% of all the value you've bothered to create. And yet we talk about it as though this is a reasonable idea. Why? Well, because we have curtailment. Remember that curtailment? At the moment, the UK average is 5%. We've already seen it could double or triple by 2027, 2030. The worst wind farm, maybe it's 30% curtailment. But here's the thing. If you take that electricity, you say, I don't want to curtail it, I'm going to lose 30%. I must make hydrogen and transport that. Well, guess what? By the time you turn it back into electricity, you've had 70% curtailment. Stupid idea from Stupidville. But it's worse than that. That's if you go back into electricity. If you look at what does our gas do, we make electricity and we do heating. So if you do heating, you could take that curtailed electricity, the 95% or the 70% that remains, and you could put it into a heat pump with a coefficient of performance of 3 or 4, or I'm trying for 5 in my house. So the break-even curtailment, you would need to be losing 87% of your electricity for this to make sense. Because take the 13% that's left, get a coefficient of performance of 4, and you're doing as well as you would be if you made hydrogen and put it in a boiler. That's reality. That's STEM. That's arithmetic. Existing uses. Now, when it comes to use, there's two sorts of uses. There's the 100 million tons, existing use. If somebody comes along and gives those companies clean hydrogen at the same price as what they're using, they'll say, thank you very much. But there are new uses. And the new uses, it's very expensive to drive hydrogen into the new uses. Why? Look at that. Just look at it. Set aside the efficiency. On the left, the complicated, high-maintenance fuel cell car, and on the right, the simple electric car. We've all taken kids' toys apart, you know, the little radio-controlled toy. There's nothing in it. You take the VW Beetle top off it, and it has a battery, and it has a little electric motor, and the little steering thing, and that's it. And that's why China is able to make good electric cars for 15,000 euros and 20,000 euros. And all our car companies that are complaining say, oh, people don't buy electric cars because they've messed up their model cycle and they can't make them cheap enough. And the fundamental problem here is physics. Engineers are brilliant. I could ask an engineer to make a Formula One car that uses steam, and they'd do it if you give them a big enough budget. The problem is it won't win any races because of physics. And you could do buses, and you can do trains, and you could do trucks. It makes no difference. This is Patrick Pouyanné. He actually is building a network of hydrogen fueling stations for trucks, but he knows already in his heart that it's not going to work. Heating, fantastic. The problem is the price break-even that you need to achieve for people to have the same utility bill is $1.90 per kilo. And by the way, the only way to have a safe house with hydrogen in it is to have holes in the wall. This is the first hydrogen safety regulation from 200 years ago, continuous ventilation. And that is the only health and safety regulation in the UK for hydrogen heating. The 12 homes in the Netherlands, I would love to know who insures them and who signed off safety. I can't find that information, and if anybody knows, come and tell me afterwards. Aviation. I'm going to just, here we go, there's a nice, I'm near the end, so I'll be fine. So aviation. This is a picture of what an airport will look like because of the energy cost of liquefaction. Forget the aeroplanes. Engineers will build you whatever. You can't get the liquid hydrogen to airports. 2.7 gigawatts of power or one liquid hydrogen truck every 2 minutes. And we knew this in 2007. 25 Großkraftwerken just for Frankfurt Airport, doubling the use of water for Frankfurt. We knew this. Why are we talking about this stuff? So you have these real challenges right across the value chain. You all know the ladder. You've got a few things you will do, a few things you won't do, definitely won't, and a few things you almost certainly won't. So we will have hydrogen hubs, industrial. All the things at the top of the ladder are industrial use cases. Green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. And that leads me to, if that's what the future looks like, these hubs, it leads me to my final slide, which is, where are there innovative opportunities for the sorts of companies and people that there are here? And you've already seen. Distribution and usage, forget it. Forget it. But in production, transportation and storage, because that is the piece that will feed those hubs, there are opportunities, reducing the costs, maybe doing some green molecules, helping to figure out how to do pipelines, storage, and the services, critically important, the services. So that would be my starter for this day, talking about innovation and startups in hydrogen. Not hopeless, I'm not anti-hydrogen, but please, can we stop talking about stuff that absolutely, categorically will not happen? Thank you.